Former statistician-general Dr. Pali Lehohla, who joins us now via our video link. And Dr. Lehohla, it's great to have you on the program. There's obviously been a lot of talk about what we're expecting the numbers to look like. But as a start, I'm hoping to pick your brain on whether or not you feel GDP as a measure is accurate enough given the kind of economy South Africa has.
The GDP as a measure was constructed after the Second World War. It had been there earlier, but as a measure that is the national account emerged after the Second World War, basically to look at the macroeconomic variables in the world, because the Second World War and the First World War were actually a consequence of macroeconomic disruptions in the way the global economy functions. So GDP was very important in that respect. But over time, it's been abused because governments look at growth as a panacea, the importance of growth to the detriment of other measures. So it's been greatly abused. And I think we have to pause and think about whether there are different measures. If you look at Bhutan, where they measure gross national happiness, what makes societies resilient, what makes societies cohere. And now they have this gross national happiness. And as a country in Bhutan, you can see that the indicators of happiness do work, population development, but GDP. You go to a nightclub, striptease, you dance your way out there, you get out of that, you get involved in a car accident, and then your wife is waiting, and then she bashes you, go to hospital. GDP grows. So this is the dilemma of GDP.
With that in mind, how should we be approaching the figures that we're seeing today? Because I imagine what you're not saying is that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's obviously a context under which, or a context from which this GDP measure comes, and we should, I guess, consider that context when Stats SA finally gives those figures later today.
I think Stats SA did something fantastic in terms of generating something called the vulnerability index using multidimensional poverty. And therefore, the GDP must be understood in the context of the multidimensional poverty that South Africans and many other nations are exposed to. And of course, there is something called the social accounting matrix, which you use out of the GDP construct to see who benefits out of the prospects of development, women, children, and so on. I think we have to use a lot more of that social accounting matrix. It must be at the forefront. But the social accounting matrix is a product of economics, and not everything relies on economics. So that's why you actually need to look at things more multidimensional. Obviously, the results at the moment are important. And of course, we know that mining has been booming, and therefore we are likely to see the growth emanating from that end. But all other sectors, as we have said in July, we had all these other mishaps. We are in a very bad state. And I think if you look at the minister's budget speech, he's projecting by 2028 a 1.8 growth of GDP. And if we have a 1.8 growth of GDP or 1.3, some miserable figure. When we know that even at 5%, only at 5% were we able to reduce unemployment from 30% to 22% in the years 2003 to 2008, we must be greatly worried about a 1.8% growth or 1.6% growth. And it means that by 2030 we will not be out of the doldrums.
Right.
So these numbers should be taken in the context of what the future might look like. And I think South Africans have to engage and say, is this satisfactory? Are there no alternatives? And if there are alternatives, how do we pursue those? Or how do we create alternatives? Because I think the path of growth of GDP means a very difficult future for South Africa.
I'm going to use the liberties I have to throw that question right back at you, actually. Do we have alternatives?
I can't hear you.
I was just going to ask you the question that you posed rhetorically. to see if there's anything that can come out of that. Do you reckon, from your vantage point, that there are alternatives that South Africa should be exploring in a context where, quite frankly, even the 5% GDP forecast is a far cry from the double-digit growth that we actually need for material change to start taking place?
There should be. There should be alternatives. Surely there should be alternatives. A country as rich as South Africa requires brighter minds to design the plans and to project what are possibilities. But I think we are locked in a neoliberal frame that looks at the CGE model, which only projects things for 2 years, 3 years, instead of looking at what will be mining in South Africa in the next 40 years, what will be industrialization. I mean, you look at the trade now, suddenly there is a boom from the mining sector. They don't know what to do with the money because they never expected it. If we don't have scenarios to expect a surprise or not to expect a surprise, we are always taken by surprise. But when you have a framework that is flexible and anticipates all kinds of things, given what you know about where you can leverage, you wouldn't be surprised by a boom. You would be able to embed it in your system and see how you use it. And you will also be able to say, is it a short term or is it a long term? At the moment, the answer is, we don't think it's a long term thing. We think that this boom is short term. Others are saying, actually, this might be a long term, 6 year, 7 year cycle, given the events that are unfolding in the world. We need to actually anticipate what happens when we have, we didn't expect Russia to be fighting Ukraine. But if we think about the stock of wheat, what do we do to the Free State to now grow wheat, given that there will be a slag in the production of this material that we also get from Ukraine?
Right.
Without that kind of plan, we cannot go far. Agriculture doesn't make those plans. Treasury doesn't make those plans. The National Development Plan, or rather the Monitoring and Evaluation Planning Ministry, doesn't make those plans. The Planning Commission doesn't make those plans. Without a long-term plan, we can't go far. I mean, there may be a long-term vision as embraced in the National Development Plan, but the hard work of actually working on policies and anticipating their outcomes, and then working on those policies simultaneously, and ensuring that no policy is left unchallenged. At the moment in South Africa, you don't challenge the macroeconomic framework. We are so terrified by that. And everybody is so terrified by that, and it freezes everybody. And that's the dominance of the Treasury over everything else.
And it's on that note, very quickly, if I can, Dr. Lehohla, that I want to get your thoughts with the seconds we have left. Keynesian economics speaks of the trickle-down effect, right? That if things work well at policy level, hopefully we're able to implement them and people at the bottom will be able to reap the benefits from that. There's been a lot of criticism against that way of thinking. I wonder how, as we digest these figures, we can start materially challenging that and asking questions about whether it works for an economy like South Africa.
It doesn't work. I mean, market tendencies as advertised by Milton on these matters of trickle-down, it doesn't work. Those who are at the end of the chain will always be waiting at the end of that chain. Trickle-down doesn't work. And many countries have shown that by using heterodox methods, the trickle-down is defeated. This is a Washington consensus, and it's driven by that, and it is driven by gravitation to the same starting point. So the market is the boss. And if you look at the market, today you have $200 billion like a Zuckerberg, and the next day you do not have it. How do countries cannot function like that? Markets don't care whether, for as long as they make their profit. And if we have to be terrified by markets, then we don't have countries. We don't have human agency. We don't have state agency. Yet, the state invests heavily on things, on a number of things, and innovates. So you've got to really move away from this trickle-down that Milton brought about with his market fundamentalism.
Sure.
And that we have embraced whole as bolas.